We've got tons of GPU news today, including some GPU price drops. We're seeing headlines that Nvidia quietly cuts price of poorly reviewed 16GB 4060 Ti ahead of AMD launch. Now, that doesn't mean it's cut down to where you'd like it to be, but it now does mean that it costs the same as a 7700 XT at $449, instead of the same as the 6800 XT at $500. And I did double check and even posted a community post that some of these are in stock, including this Zotac Spider-Man version on Amazon. I also noticed that AMD's own RX 6800 XT has dropped as low as about $485 on Amazon. So definitely looks like that it's possible that this $400 to $500 GPU price range is finally going to get some competition from these new cards and shake things up. So maybe that means don't necessarily need to run out and buy one of these today, and maybe see what happens with these reviews. As usually is a good idea if GPUs are coming out in a few days. Maybe take a look at how they do. Now, interestingly enough, let's talk a little bit about some more Starfield results. So I got some Starfield benchmarks out like the night that the game was available, and I was concerned that I was doing something wrong because of how poorly the Nvidia GPUs were performing relatively. But now that other channels have a bunch more benchmarks out confirming this, including what we're seeing from Hardware Unboxed here, it seems like it is just the case that especially at the ultra quality preset, but yeah, really at all the presets as well, Nvidia GPUs are getting hammered compared to where you would normally expect them to fall. For example, we would usually expect in a non-ray traced result, a card like an RTX 3080, especially when we're not spilling over VRAM capacity, which doesn't seem to be the case in Starfield. It's not incredibly VRAM heavy, and especially here at 1080p Ultra, we would normally expect this to be comparable to a 6800 XT. Some games, one's a little ahead of the other, but there's not usually a massive discrepancy. But here you're seeing the difference between 60 FPS and 42 FPS. That's a massive difference that we wouldn't normally expect, and it does confirm the results I was getting in my video. Also, though, in general, this doesn't mean that AMD is doing that well either, because the RX 6800 XT getting 60 frames per second at 1080p is hardly impressive results. Now, granted, Hardware Unboxed was measuring a forest scene of the game, which I think is even more demanding than the New Atlantis scene that I was testing in my video. But again, confirmed results that these are extremely demanding. Oh, and if you wanted one of those $449 4060 Ti 16 gigabytes, looks like you're getting, about 35 FPS at 1080p Ultra in that scene. So anyway, there's that. But hey, at least you don't maybe try to play the game on an Intel GPU, because it looks like the Intel Arc owners are going to have to wait for Intel to get a working driver for the game, as it's currently just not working. Also interesting has been CPU testing. I did some CPU testing myself. I only had about 3 CPUs to compare that I just happen to have set up and ready to go in some systems. Definitely showed that you can get CPU bottlenecked in the game, but wasn't really extensive enough testing to look at results between brands, like is this better on Intel or AMD, because I wasn't really testing equivalent performing CPUs. I was looking at more of a variety of CPUs. Here at PC Game Hardware, which I've machine learning translated into English, they tested a whole bunch more CPUs, and it does look like they were getting better results on their Intel CPUs. However, I will mention that they're using DDR5 5600 speed on their 13th gen Intels, while only using 5200 speed DDR5 on their AMD AM5 CPUs, and again, a slower RAM as they went down. For example, their 12th gen Intels were only on DDR5 4400 on. So it's actually possibly pointing to this being a RAM bottleneck, rather than preferring one of these CPU architectures over the other, and I think that could use more exploration. I don't have a bunch of different RAM kits myself, though, to do that type of testing. Also, the game did ship with only FSR, but as expected, it immediately had some DLSS mods available. And this one is really interesting from MX Benchmark PC. And I'm going to play this for a second, and I want you to watch the image stability in motion, because this doesn't show up in still screenshots, but watch as we play. I don't know how much this is going to pick up, but in the background here, it's a little bit unstable. There's some temporal flickering, and that's still here with FSR. But with the DLSS, they have the 3.5 file version in here. You can see that that's temporal stability improves. Now, the performance at the same resolution scale between the DLSS and the FSR 2.2, at least on the GPU they're testing here, isn't significantly different. But again, you get the reduced flickering with the DLSS upscaler. So again, it shows that it would have been nice for GPUs who can support it to have this available. By the way, if you're seeing that DLSS 3.5 there and you're like, wait, does that work on a RTX 2060? Because isn't DLSS 3 only on... Anyway, I did a video earlier explaining what's going on with that. So yes, the DLSS 3.5 file can work on any RTX GPU, including the 20 and 30 series. And also, no, this doesn't mean that the DLSS 3.5 exclusive feature ray reconstruction is working in Starfield, because it doesn't even have ray tracing anyway. And that feature needs specific game implementation, so just dropping in the DLL does not make that suddenly work. Now, with this game, there was all sorts of thoughts on why it would only ship with FSR rather than DLSS according to launch. There was a lot of talk about this being because of AMD requiring that as part of their partnership. Now, AMD had originally just had a whole bunch of no comments. At Gamescom, we had AMD's Frank Azor making statements that certainly sounded like Bethesda was free to use DLSS in the game if they wished to. Getting some clarification. Now, to be clear, though, this tweet is not exactly... Also, this tweet has been deleted, and this is a Reddit post that has the direct quote. Not specifically talking about Starfield specifically, but more AMD partnered games in general. Digital Foundry's John Linneman apparently tweeted, I wouldn't put a label on what I do. I'm not out here investigating things and I don't want to. What I can say, because it was on DF Direct, is that I've personally spoken with 3 devs that implemented DLSS pre-release and had to remove it due to sponsorship. Now, to be clear, he is not saying Starfield specifically with that deal, but other apparently AMD-sponsored games the devs did implement DLSS and then removed it as part of this partnership, the partnership with AMD, the sponsorship. Now, what the exact terms of that arrangement were, if the devs were required to or just encouraged to or whatever, is not entirely clear based on this statement. And again, he did end up deleting the tweet and clarified that, no problem, I also deleted it due to confusion. I wasn't talking about Starfield at all. So again, we don't know exactly what happened, but it doesn't seem to have taken modders very long to implement DLSS, and it does seem to provide some image stability and reconstruction benefits over the FSR implementation of the game if you do have an RTX GPU available. Now, speaking of AMD GPUs, like the 7700 XT, we are seeing some leaked benchmark results. This looking like time spy scores specifically. First, we had the 7700 XT time spy score leak, where we see that it did match closely, but a little bit behind the 4070. Not as fast as 6800 XT, seemed closer to the RX 6800. But it's also clear when looking at comparing Nvidia to AMD in time spy scores that this does not always line up to how they perform in actual gaming benchmarks. This is a synthetic test, so it's not necessarily great at comparing different GPU architectures in their actual gaming performance. That being said, we're also, a couple days later, got leaked RX 7800 XT time spy score results. Now again, this is not a full-on time spy screenshot. This is everybody's favorite GPU leaker, Copite7Kimmy, saying 7800 XT, about 19K. When he makes tweets like this, he's generally referring to time spy results, and it's not giving an exact number. This videocards.com article has summarized, where that would fall, plus the leaked 7700 XT result in line with various GPUs, I think given their kind of average time spy results is what they're compared against. So of course, your GPU might perform better or worse than that, especially if you're overclocking it or something like that. But these results would put the 7800 XT neck and neck with the RX 6800 XT. The 6800 XT, like I said, has had its price fall as low as $485 right now. So that's certainly interesting, again, with the 7800 XT coming in at a $499 MSRP. Again, 4070 is a bit behind that, but again, these are synthetic benchmarks, so we need to make of that, what we will. And we can also see, again, the 7700 XT there, fairly close to the score on the RX 6800. RX 6800s right now look like about $430 when you're looking at the cheapest new models. So certainly interesting to see how the 6800 XT and 6800 do against the 7800 XT and 7700 XT once we do get those benchmarks out there. Again, speaking of AMD and speaking of the 7700 XT, 7800 XT, all of that, Club 386 had a really interesting interview with AMD's Radeon head, Scott Herkelman. This is very long. I can't read you through this entire interview, but links to everything I'm talking about today will be in the video description. I did go ahead and take some notes on what I found were the most interesting highlights, but there were certainly some other interesting quotes in that interview, and I do encourage you to read the whole thing if you are interested in more detail. There were questions like, hey, the 7700 XT at $449 is priced very close to the 7800 XT at $499. It doesn't, if you look at the specs, that seems to be too close of a price, right? Scott Herkelman replied with, well, $50 is a big deal. And now, by the way, I wasn't direct quoting the question, but that was the topic. Here's the direct quote from Scott Herkelman, at least part of it in his answer. $50 is a big deal for people who are looking at 7800 XT to 7700 XT class of GPUs. I'm going to argue that if you're spending $450, $500, well, that is more and it is noticeable. That's not crazy different. Anyway, get on with this quote. The price could always be cheaper on a GPU, but if we don't make money, then it's hard to make a roadmap. $50 at this level is a good price gap, and we'll have to see how it plays out on the market. I bolded that because that's the big thing, is AMD does have a history of launching GPUs and then a few months later seeing the prices drop as they respond to the overall market. And it seems to be hinting that, well, that might be what we see happen here. We tried to go super aggressive on pricing, but at the same time, we're a company and have to make money. So that's the overall response. Again, I really think it's missing the mark. In other words, I think some people expected the 7800 XT to be more like $550. And so $450, $550, maybe you're less excited about the pricing on the 7800 XT, but at least the price gap between the two models seems to make a bit more sense. At a $50 price difference, it does seem like a bit of a tough sell on the 7700 XT, which is going to have, 10% fewer CUDA cores, but it's also only 75% of the VRAM and 75% of the memory system, right? So probably more than a 10% performance difference and VRAM difference for $50 at that price point. Seems a little rough. Anyway, some other topics in the video. Lower end chips will be offering worse performance per dollar increase over time. APUs in older gen will fill gap below 7600. So he was asked basically about, are we going to do anything below the 7600? So this bold was kind of my note on the topic, not a direct quote, but basically talking about lower end segments. So here was some interesting quotes. We still do have a good portfolio down below on Navi 2, whether that's RX 6500 or 6600 series or 6700 series. There are constraints going forward for smaller dies insofar as producing affordable silicon that gives you good gen-to-gen performance benefits. The smaller the die you produce, the harder it is to get that increase in performance for the cost. You'll start to see some slowdown in roadmaps below that $150 to $200 discrete GPU pricing. That's the challenge of inflation, the challenge of Moore's Law, and the market that we're in now. So right there, we're basically hearing the lower end segment, that $150 to $200 and below, probably is not going to be seeing a whole lot of interesting stuff moving forward. That's kind of what he's saying. It's more difficult to hit a good performance bump and keep that same price point, at least according to him. So Also interesting was the mention of APUs in that segment. So he says, at least from AMD, you'll start seeing APUs being pretty good at that lower pricing level where we normally see a discrete GPU, and this will only strengthen as time goes on. He talks about whether or not people can really accept that in the desktop space. He says if people can get over that mental hurdle, they'll actually find an APU can play most esports games pretty well. So kind of saying that if you're not into the graphically demanding single player games and you just want to play esports, that maybe APUs would fit the bill and get the job done for you at a lower price. So interesting stuff there, and I did skip over some of it. Some response to that, but let's get through some more quotes and I'll give some more thoughts. Anyway, also asking about AFMF, which is AMD Fluid Motion Frames, being limited to RDNA 3 GPUs. To be clear, this is not FSR 3. FSR 3 will be available on a wider range of GPUs, but the feature of doing the frame interpolation without the extra benefit to the motion vector data and all that, but being applicable to almost every DX11 and DX12 game, being exclusive to RDNA 3, was asked about that, and the quote in response was, "We have to start somewhere. I can say that we're exploring enablement for older generations. Do remember we're launching a few things close together, FSR 3, Hyper RX, AFMF, and so we had to limit something by prioritizing and focusing the teams. There is an exploration happening, so if there is good reception of AFMF and gamers believe it to be worthwhile, we'll take it to the next step and see if we can enable it on RDNA 2. If that goes well, then maybe older generations too. For now, we're focusing on getting AFMF to the market." So basically what it sounds like to me is this is a cool idea, and they'll be able to get it to market sooner if they just target RDNA 3. And honestly, guys, there's a big question on whether the image quality of this, not FSR 3, but like the non-motion vector version of this that just runs at the driver level, whether the image quality would be good enough, and whether the input latency would be good enough, and all of that for this to really be an exciting feature. If it is an exciting feature, it sounds like then they would look into maybe bringing that to other GPUs and putting in the work. But for now, it's more just getting it out there and kind of seeing how it goes and maybe expanding support in the future. But it looks like they're at least open to that. They were also directly quoted about AMD's ray tracing weakness versus Nvidia, and if they're gonna, plan anything about that. The quote in response is, "I think we still have the lead in performance per dollar, yet we do take ray tracing performance into consideration when doing our pricing calculations. Reviewers like yourself," speaking to the Club 386 interviewer, "tell us we're doing okay in pure frames per second, but not so good in ray tracing. So we try to price that difference in our SEP, ensuring Radeon GPUs offer great value." So basically, the initial response is, in the current market, they're just going to price with ray tracing in mind. So they should be offering better non-ray tracing performance per dollar. And then when you do enable ray tracing, then, well, hey, at least it costs less, I guess is kind of what they're saying for now. And they do say, "We just have to do better on future generations, making sure we have the right architecture for efficient ray tracing. Furthermore, we need to continue working with ISV partners for games to have the best experience." So that sounds like they are acknowledging that, there is a future in ray tracing in games and that they do need to have hardware that can deal with that. It seems like NVIDIA's moved towards that. These chips take years ahead of time of planning to get them out to market, right? So if you get kind of blindsided by you weren't planning on ray tracing being a thing and then suddenly it is, now you have to spin things around, but that can probably take a long time to get hardware that's really taken that in mind, maybe as a more central point. Anyway, and they're also just talking about implementations with game partners, working with that kind of thing. Also, a big difference we're noticing between NVIDIA's 4000 series and AMD's 7000 series is energy efficiency. And when asked about this energy efficiency deficit, this is part of the quote. It was a very long response, but they said, "In notebooks, that matters greatly. In desktop, it matters, but not to everyone. There's some people who are really concerned about power, others don't care as much." Because the idea is in a notebook, like your battery life constrained, so you really cannot ignore the power consumption. In the desktop space, some people don't care too much about the extra heat and energy bill a little bit, all of that. They have a big enough power supply. They care more about just raw performance, right? So some people care more there, some people care less, and they say we definitely want to make a better performance per watt chip. A better chip makes the overall board more affordable, and he went on for a bit. Power is definitely a prime initiative. You'll see us over time get better and better at it. We need to catch up. There are still bugs that we need to fix. So this point was basically saying like that'll be a prime focus for the future. But then he's getting on to their current GPUs, talking about the idle power consumption issues that people have brought up. They're acknowledging there are still bugs we need to fix. Idle power is one of them. We believe there is a driver fix for it. It's a wonky one, actually. We do see some inconsistencies with idle power that shouldn't be there, and we're working with our partners to maybe help with that. It will be cleaned up, but it might take a bit more time. So it's certainly acknowledging some issues they can probably clean up with drivers, but others will probably just take, future generations moving forward, but making that a prime focus. Honestly, guys, he's not saying it, but it seems like the 7000 series kind of missed its mark in performance per watt efficiency that they were going for. Now, in related to a lot of what he was saying here, remember his mention of APUs being an interesting space for the lower end segment and those becoming more important and more powerful. Well, at videocards.com, we're seeing a leak of AMD's next-gen Ryzen 8000 APU spotted that has 16 RDNA 3.5 GPU cores. This is kind of just some hardware info screenshots, probably from some kind of an engineering sample, pointing to that. It'll be interesting to see how these perform. If we really stop getting any really low-end or low-price GPUs with much performance gain, it will be interesting to see how the APU segment can play into that. Another thing I wanted to bring up is, part of what he said about there not being a maybe necessarily anything below the 7600 and being harder, but the 6000 series filling in the space below that. This is not official, this is rumor, but we are seeing reports that AMD has halted production of the RX 6650 XT, and that is expected to at least be sold out in China by the end of September. This is looking like it's coming from the Board Channels forum, and the official quote saying the AMD factory plans to stop production for a certain GPU. At present, the shipments of all AIB brand manufacturers have stopped production and inventory has been digested. AMD has discontinued production of the RX 6650 XT, and basically all brands have sold out of stock, and it is estimated that they will be almost sold out by the end of September. Now, it is just the 6650 XT, but we'll have to see what happens with the rest of that 6000 series. Again, cards like the RX 6600 non-XT have been hanging in the $180 to $200 range, which has been a nice budget GPU for sure. Anyway, let's move on to some other topics. So a while back, I reported that Intel's NUC division, which was doing little mini PCs and more, was being, kind of winded down. Intel was no longer going to do that. However, it looks like ASUS has officially taken charge of the NUC division. So basically, ASUS is now the owner of NUC, and is going to move forward with that. So NUC is not dead, it just no longer belongs to Intel, basically, is what I'm making of that. Some other interesting devices, we're seeing ANEO Kun, or I don't know how to pronounce, KUN, features an 8.4-inch 2.5K display, 75 watt-hour battery, and Ryzen 7 7840U APU, up to 54 watts, costs from $1,000 to $2,000. Interesting. We have also seen from ANEO, though, some other models being tested. Like, I don't think I pulled it up here as a tab, but I just saw the ANEO 1S, which has a little, I think an OLED screen, is much smaller, very small form factor. That one certainly looked interesting. We've also seen the Lenovo Legion Go with the detachable controllers and stuff. But anyway, this handheld gaming PCs are really picking up steam. A lot of very interesting models come out. Again, that 1S from ANEO that has the OLED display is certainly interesting to me, because right now that's my main concern with the Steam Deck, is I'm just not a huge fan of the display quality. So having an OLED display would certainly be interesting as an option. In other interesting stuff, how about Colorful introducing the GeForce RTX 4060 B760M and custom PC Tower chassis, all under the Colorfire MEOW series. Certainly interesting to see some different sorts of designs. I think this might be a China-only thing, but certainly a different sort of design than the standard gamery designs, which I like to see some varieties in availability. Also from Sapphire, they're coming out with the Party Animals series. So, Radeon GPUs. So interesting stuff on those kinds of designs. In other interesting designs, MaxSun has launched a 5-fan RTX 4090. If you think this looks familiar, not only have I reported on the 4070 Ti and 4080 version of this 5-fan cooler, but I believe Gamers Nexus even did a video on, I can't remember if it was the 4080 or 4070 Ti version of it, but even had a teardown and stuff like that, where it's not unclear if these fans, if I remember right, were really doing much, but it's certainly interesting to see different sorts of GPU designs, which is what I'm highlighting here. We're also seeing a new GALAX RTX 4090 AIO solution that's in white. So again, not that this is the only AIO solution, but again, kind of a not just your typical GPU design. And we're also seeing ASUS with an RTX 4090 Evangelion, I always forget if it's a hard G or not, whatever. Anyway, debuting in China. Looks like it's not cheap, as no 4090 is. And again, they have more branding with that series lineup. Also in unique designs, we see the AMD's Starfield themed 7900 XTX GPU along with a 7800X 3D CPU. The CPU really just has a unique box. But the GPU itself actually has its own, Starfield-themed design. Now, these were being given away as prizes, but this one's ended up on eBay and is currently at over $4,000. So certainly not a bang for the buck purchase in a value perspective, but if you really want the AMD Starfield premium, package here as a collector's item or build theme, I guess, and you have a lot of money, there you go. We're also seeing Sapphire formally introducing its 7800 XT and 7700 XT Nitro, Pulse, and Pure series, with videocards.com having some screenshots of those. And we are seeing Zotac launching the VR Go 4.0 backpack with Nvidia RTX A2000 GPU costing 3,700. Is that pound? That's pounds, right? Great British pounds. The point is, I'm an American. The other point is, that's a lot of money, and not necessarily the highest end hardware, but the idea is that you have a PC in a backpack for playing VR stuff. It's certainly interesting. Now, they already released a version of this back in 2022. And I believe this is actually a downgrade of the graphics card, because the 2022 version had an RTX A4500 with 16 gigabytes, and it appears to be an 8 gigabyte A2000 GPU in this version. So yeah, seems like a downgrade. And also in a little bit of PC gaming news, it looks like Final Fantasy XVI PC version and 2 DLCs are now in development. But it probably will be quite a while before we actually see the PC version of the game. Anyway, hopefully you guys found today's GPU news and PC hardware news video interesting and or useful. Stay tuned for the channel, especially as we get into next week with the 7700 XT and 7800 XT and all that. Sure, we'll have some interesting things to talk about, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.